So, my first question to you would be, what got you into climate research and what inspired you to become a climate scientist?
I didn't really have a plan when I was a teenager finishing my education what I would do, but I've always been deeply in love with the ocean. And so I started as a marine scientist trying to understand how the marine environment reacts to environmental change. And then if you do that, then climate change and the threats it poses to our ecosystems and our biodiversity becomes a natural question. I would have never seen myself as an IPCC author, but someone encouraged me to put my name forward when they were looking for authors. And they were looking for people who have a wide range of interests and backgrounds. And so this is how I turned from a scientist who is producing research papers to a scientist who's trying to synthesize some of that and to put it in a policy relevant context.
Danny, you mentioned the IPCC report and your role in it. Can you let us know what it's about and why it's important?
The IPCC stands for the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. It produces what it calls assessment reports, which is, in our case, a summary of 34,000 papers which were published in the last 7 years. What we're trying to do is to assess what the key risks are of climate change, how we can adapt to it, and how we can change that pathway of climate risk. The IPCC is a United Nations body, and it then has a call for authors to join and provide the evidence. The local nations nominate people, and then we're looking at diversity of voices, diversity of backgrounds, gender, and other characteristics we can take into consideration. So for the working group 2, which looks at impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability, where I was an author, we were nearly 270 authors from all over the world. Then we had lots of contributing authors who helped us on specifics where we just didn't have the backgrounds.
What kind of evidence were you looking at?
It's a big report. So the report has 3,500 pages. And so what we were trying to look for is evidence of impacts that climate change is already mattering for a wide range of systems. So ecosystems, both on land and in the ocean, health, our cities, but as well as regional examples. We then wanted to quantify what those key risks are for the future and what they are under different degrees of warming. But what's really important to us is not just to show what the risk is, because that often becomes depressing and becomes really difficult. We wanted to show what the solutions are, how we can have pathways which allow us to reduce the risk.
So, Danny, can you tell us how the IPCC process works?
So first we're coming together and we are scoping what we think as academics are the most important new things, and then coming up with an outline which goes back to the governments. And then the governments think about, is this all the information we need? And then we write a first draft, which is much more about ensuring that we all know what each of the chapters will cover. So for example, in the last scoping exercise, there was a decision to have a specific focus on cities by the sea. So there were some things which they wanted to point out, mountains, polar, and so that helps us to think about, what kind of teams do we need? Each of those iterations then is reviewed by academics, but also by governments. Wow. So we had 64,000 reviewer comments, and we need to answer each of them individually. And then when we have those chapters, then we write a technical summary. So the 3,500 pages are condensed into something which is around 80 pages. And then we're writing a summary for policymakers, which is really the essence, the key points of what we want to get across. And then the entire process changes. So we come together with representatives of the 195 United Nations recognized governments, and then we are co-writing the summary for policymakers. The scientists ensure that the science is accurate and that the assessment is right, but the governments also make sure that we use terms which are understood, that we have the focus on what is needed, that we link well to the other working groups. And this is when the authorship changes. So our names aren't on this anymore. It is called the IPCC. And it's a co-design with governments, which is a really interesting process.
As an IPCC author, what's a day in the life like?
So the IPCC authors don't get paid for what we do. So we still continue to do our normal work. We are teachers, we are academics. I was the IPCC author and I was the faculty research director for the Faculty of Sciences. It comes in pulses a bit. We write and try to finish and then hand over for review. And then we have a few months where we wait for the reviewer comments to come back, where we continue, but not as the same pace. There were press conferences, there was working with the media, There were briefings to our governments. There's community engagement with the student union, with schools, various different groups, because it's really important to get the message out. This year, that was particularly challenging for us because the war in Ukraine started. And so the media and the politicians are very much focusing on this question. And so it made it much harder for us to communicate.
So, what are the key messages from Working Group 2 that you would like to share with us?
I think what's really important for us is that everyone recognizes that climate change is not for the future. Climate change is here now. The warming of 1.1 degree has already impacts. We can see increases in floods, increases in heat events, in droughts events, and we can see their impacts on agricultural production, on human health. And those risks will increase with every increment of warming. 3.3 billion people on this planet are highly vulnerable to climate change. And some of those are in regions you would expect. You can think about regions which are already today might not have health systems like we have in the UK, have famines. But at the same time, we also need to remember that even in affluent countries, people are vulnerable to climate change. We saw it in the flooding just before the pandemic, how people were flooded out. They were in a much worse position when the pandemic struck to shelter somewhere. What's really important to us as well is that the entire narrative is not just about the risks. Yes, there's a section which talks about the risks, but then there is an important part which talks about how we can adapt, how we can make changes in our behavior, in infrastructure, in our cities, in our health systems to reduce the risks of climate change. And then most importantly, we end on what we call climate resilient development pathways. And they emphasize that it's really important for us to combine our fight against injustice, our fight against inequality, the biodiversity losses and climate change, and all of these come together. Because the worst thing we could do is that adaptation to climate change is just something which wealthy nations can afford, and thereby increasing the inequality. And so we really need to think about that legal context, the place context of how we adapt and how we're changing the world.
What's the difference between this report and the last IPCC report? And what are the things that we can highlight about these changes that is very important for all of us to know?
So for me, the messages of climate change is already here. Climate change is not affecting everyone the same way. Impacts are happening earlier, but we have means to adapt. We have means to reduce the risks, and we have visions of how we can make a more climate resilient world is really important. Because otherwise we're talking about anxiety without a solution. And what the report has done, which we have never been able to do before, is we looked at the feasibility and effectiveness of adaptation options. What works where? How much of a difference does it make? And I think that's really important for local communities and decision makers, for civil society at all its level. We need to know what works. We need to learn from others and then make it our own.
As a climate scientist, where do you think there are opportunities for action and by whom?
For me, it's really important that everyone feels empowered to take action. I think it's important not to give anyone the feeling that they have to solve the climate crisis by themselves. But those answers will be different. The three of us are from very different countries. Our countries have experienced climate change differently, but also our communities would find different emphasis of what needs to be done. And it's important to give stewardship to those local communities, that they have a word and that they are heard in whatever those decisions are. Local solutions look different, but also local needs are different. Feasibility of an adaptation option is not just, can it be technologically done? Is it economically viable? But also, is it socially acceptable? And that will be very different in the different parts of the world. And we've heard a lot in the media about the plight of the small island nations, where sea level rise is an existential threat. It's also important to consider that the impacts we're already seeing will increase already in the near term. So even if we would to increase mitigation a lot and we would reduce warming, impacts won't stop straight away.
Thank you so much for discussing the findings. I am very interested to know, how can these findings support the movement for climate justice?
I think it's really important to look back at historical emissions. And there's a huge discussion around loss and damage. It's really important also that we think more about what can we change in our societies at large. That's per capita consumption. That is seeing that those countries who are most vulnerable to climate change have not had the largest footprint in historical emissions. For us as the IPCC, we put that information on the table. It's really important that we think, though, where are these 3.3 billion people? And how can we reduce their vulnerability not just to climate change, but vulnerability to changes in weather, to the crisis they might be in because of governance issues in their regions? How can we make people more resilient? So it's important that all those regions, all those people, ensure that their governments see this as a priority. How do you make someone think about climate change, which might happen in 10 or 20 years, when they don't know how to feed their families today? How do we deal with climate change when we have wars all over the world? How do we think about migration and displacement and vulnerability without combining conflict, justice, and climate change?
That's right, and these problems are interconnected. We're looking at the climate crisis, we're looking at biodiversity loss, and we're also looking at the social dimensions of these crises, as you discussed earlier. So, what is your opinion on this statement? It has been said before that the climate crisis is also an inequality crisis.
I think it's important that it's inequality within regions, but also within countries. So we just started a project here in Bristol with the heart of BS13. Bristol overall is a relatively affluent city in a very affluent country, but there are parts of our city where socioeconomic deprivation limits people from being able to engage in this. How do we give those young people a voice? How do we empower the communities of which all three of us are coming from, that they know how to access information, that they know how to express what they think, and how to make that heard both in their local governance system but also in their national government system?
So, can you suggest how student communities can contribute to this crisis and avert it if possible?
As a student, you have already gathered a huge amount of information in your heads. You've also learned how to find information, how to summarize information, and how to present information. So I think if we were to link up people who look for information with this knowledge of all of us here, not just the lecturers, but you as well, because we can all contribute to empowering people to find information, to find out what's happening to them, how they can voice it, and how they can be part of that conversation. I think that would be an amazing legacy.
For me, my interest really, because I am studying law and Vartika, you're studying policy, it's really trying to see how we can all work together and lend our expertise in our different disciplines and move it to further our shared collective goals around sustainable development and to just create a better world for future generations, because these issues are happening right now as we speak.
And I think it's really important as well, what you do is you talk with each other. You have a different background. So the words we use when we talk about climate change depend on where we're coming from. You know, when we talk about resilience, that means something different to someone who's an ecologist and someone who is an engineer to someone who's doing law. By talking with each other and by working with each other, you make sure that you have a common language.
Thank you so much.